Hey everybody. Oh, wow, that's like really rough screen there. Let's see. Um, I'm Nico Osier, Dr. Nico Osier, and I'm excited to present to you today on my presentation, Symbiotic Creation of an Open Ed Textbook that Fosters the Next Generation of Open Ed Leaders. And this is a presentation that I worked on with a number of undergraduate student volunteers, including Kylie, Amaniya, Hayat, Yoori, Yoon, Vedin, Barve, and Sunwoo Kim. So first, a little bit of background on like why I undertook this project in the first place. There are, as you probably well know, a lot of really good reasons to use open educational resources in your class. First and foremost, they're totally free for students. And students already spend a lot of money on education. At my institution, they spend a lot of money for credit hour, and then a lot of them have additional expenses related to course textbooks. I also teach at a school of nursing, and so they have like um, skills supplies that they have to purchase as well. So it adds up really quick. Another good reason to use OER is that you can pick and choose what you want to like incorporate into your class. You don't get as like tied down to having one resource and you just go through the whole book, even if it doesn't really fit your needs. And you can combine sources and add in a second book that covers something else better without any additional cost. So that's a nice option. Being able to edit and modify it if the license allows. And then being able to add and update it to keep it up to the state of the science, which in a medical or nursing focused genetics class, there's a lot of um, developments that occur every year in terms of how we treat patients, the tests that are available, et cetera. So that is a really important feature for me. Um, but there's not OER available for a lot of courses, including based on my fairly extensive search, a good textbook for nurses to learn about genomic content. In order for a book to be a good source for nurses to learn genetics from, in my opinion, it needs to be solely focused on humans, not yeast, not bacteria, not, pigs or plants or Mendel's peas or anything like that. And the content needs to be directly linked to concepts related to human development, human health, clinical testing, diagnosis, treatment, and that kind of thing. It needs to really not get bogged down in the details of molecular biology, which a lot of really good OER textbooks are available that are more about like the basic science side of genetics. But my nursing students don't need to know the difference between polymerase 1 and polymerase 3. That's just like not really going to serve them. I need them to know like what is DNA replication? When does it happen? How can mutations get introduced during DNA replication? And like what are the impacts on that in terms of, you know, normal growth and development, creating new tissue after an injury, and also in cancer and things like that. And then in the context of nursing, we have some very specific roles and responsibilities that people in our discipline are tasked with, including assessment, diagnosis, education, and referral. So really tying the concepts closely to that so that it lines up with their scope and standards of practice nicely, which is important for like training competent nurses, but also is important for things like accreditation of our school as well. So there's a need for more OER to be created. Um, it's not just a lack of OER and freely available sources to teach nurses genetics. I've also reviewed a number of not free sources for nursing genetics textbooks, and none of them really met the needs that I outlined on that past slide. And I had so many growing pains leading up to this because I wasn't really adequately prepared to vet, locate, vet, evaluate OER, and certainly had no real idea what it was going to entail to write it and just how much work it was going to be when I undertook this. So my purpose here today is fivefold. I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about some of those obstacles to finding OER for my course, talk about the effort that is needed to create OER and how we applied some novel processes in my team to have undergraduates help with the creation of this textbook and how we use some organizational systems to kind of get everybody on task and keep it organized. And then hopefully by the time you leave here, you will be empowered to be able to, replicate and modify the system that we use so you could create your own OER resource using similar SOPs to walk your volunteers through the various steps. And you'll be able to talk about the effectiveness of our process and what remains to be desired. So there are a lot of obstacles to incorporating OER into classes, as I mentioned before. A big one is that people don't know where to look in the first place. There are repositories for OER textbooks like OpenStax and things like that that can be assessed to try to see what's in there. But what I was really finding was available OER tend to focus on the basic science piece of genetics, and there really wasn't anything that focused on clinical relevance to human health and disease and how it impacts a healthcare provider's role. In terms of faculty challenges, I think that there's, yeah, a general lack of awareness about those repositories, but also a lack of knowledge about how to create quality OER, how to ensure accessibility of the content, that it's like screen reader compatible and all that, how to decide on licensing stuff, etc. So I became really good friends with the librarians in my university, and we have some librarians that specialize in knowledge of OER and these repositories and tools. So creating an OER, it's a lot of work. And if you are teaching a full-time course load, it might exceed realistically the amount of time and bandwidth that you have available. This is just a few, I say few, but it's like 16 different steps that I went through. I really recommend starting by reviewing the available options and trying to find anything that works, because that's really the true beauty of OER is that if the license is right, you can adapt and modify them. Um, but when you are searching, you got to take really good notes to make sure that you note the licensing info and that you're like using it as intended. Um, Identifying gaps in the resources and figure out what pieces you want to address. Start to outline the missing content for flow, clarity, and comprehensiveness. Always keeping track of and formatting the sources, like works cited that you want to include, finding, incorporating, and using pictures that are freely available, or creating your own figures, which needs to be done with a consideration for maximizing accessibility, avoiding um, like red, green color ways being too close together, because that's going to be hard for red, green colorblind people to read, um, et cetera, et cetera. Making sure that there's like good contrast, unambiguous symbols, and things like that. Then, so that it's screen reader compatible, you're going to need to have alt image text created for all the figures included, whether you generated them or they existed from another source. They'll need figure titles and captions. You got to edit all the text once it's been, outlined, drafted, written. You got to have consistent and accessible formatting. Again, making sure that it's screen reader compatible, using the built-in like headings functions of Google Docs or whatever platform that you're using. Um, you got to look at the different options for where you can host your OER and what the strengths and limitations are of each of those, and ultimately decide on your platform, figure out what kind of licensing you want to use, and like it goes on and on and on. I'm trying to have some of my content reviewed by content experts, trying to make sure that my stuff matches up with the national licensing examination and other things like that. So, what did we do on my team, and how did we do it so that maybe you might adapt it for your own intents and purposes? So step one was I realized pretty quickly on that I was going to need a little help, honestly, more than a little help. Um, and when I first became faculty, I read a book called Neil Nemus, I think is what it's called. And it was all this advice for a new faculty member. And one of the pieces of advice was let others do some of the work for you. And that's been like revolutionary and changed my life. Like getting help and identifying people who also benefit from working on this was huge. So I found a bunch of undergrads who are pre-health focused, who have relevant knowledge, who've taken some genetics classes, maybe even my genetics and healthcare class. Most of them want to go into health science careers and are studying for the NCLEX or the MCAT. And so this is an opportunity for them to like review um, content related to genetics, but also to get experience writing that they can put on their resume and just get a letter of reference from me vouching for them, having developed a relationship with them. We'll talk more about how they benefit later. Then the very muddy process of throwing it against the wall and seeing what sticks. We just kind of like dove in and I came up with an outline and just started chipping away at it myself. Um, and then we paused and we were like, what's going well here? What's not really working? And the biggest thing was that we needed more organization and more clear delegation. So we got organized, developed a delegation system and some clear instructions, and then get back into it, plow through with the new system, update the instructions as we went along, and see where it takes us. So the crux of our organization system really relies on the division of undergrad volunteers into specific roles. We have a role for content curators and writers, people who look at existing content through available OERs for possible inclusion and making sure we get the credit to that original author, people who write novel content. Um, my textbook is unique in that it follows like a question and answer style format so that each heading is a question and that can kind of help the reader decide how much time they need to spend in that section. So students signed up to answer one of the questions basically, and I'll show you all how we delegated that in a little bit. There's also a role that's involved with editing what's been written and also typesetting the formatting to make sure it's all consistent and accessible. And then there are other students who work in one of two graphic related roles, one that's finding existing graphics and doing the alt image captioning, and the other that's designing novel figures in Canva and then passing them off to people to do the alt image captioning on them. We also use a few different apps. I usually use the Google Suite in my team. So we use Google Docs, Google Slides, and Google Sheets to actually like get the work done. And I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. We also used Airtable to curate our resources and to delegate out who's going to be doing what. I have a Canva Pro account, and we use that for generating novel images that we weren't able to find good examples of. And then we generated a bunch of standard operating procedures to walk volunteers through any recurring task um, that needed to be standardized, like formatting. And these continue to be written and edited as needed to address confusion. And as volunteers are using these, we ask them to keep them updated if they identify an issue and talk to me about it. I'm like, great, you're responsible for changing the SOP so that everybody has that clarification that you came to me for. So here are some of the things that we use to track progress. So in Airtable, I have like a big outline of the whole book that has the names of the chapters and then links to the Google Docs and then sort of like status update. And then within each chapter, the headings correspond to questions that are addressed by the corresponding text. And then for each of these, there was somebody who was the writer, the editor. We kind of talk about like how far we've gone, have we done one round of editing or not, who's designing the figures and so on. And then we have a Google Sheet that has tabs for each of the chapters as well. And the volunteers log their time here, which this is helpful for a couple different reasons. Just keeping the volunteers accountable and, keeping track of who's done what and making sure that people get adequate credit and using this to decide on like byline order, but also helping us realize how long each of these chapters is taken so that we can improve and refine the like planning for subsequent chapters. In Google Suite, we actually do the work of writing. So here is an outline for chapter, and you can see in bold, those are the headings, which are the questions that are asked. And then a brief response of what the answer is so that a reader could decide if they need to go into that in detail or not. We do the writing in Google Docs, as well as the editors use the suggestion mode to track their changes and they leave comments. And then this figure was generated in Canva and then like moved over to the Google document. So this is where we're actually doing the work of like writing and assembling the content. For the image curators who look for existing images, I have a stock images database in Airtable. If you use this tiny URL.com/stock images database, it will take you there and you can have access to it. I presented on this actually at a past open ed, and this has been a really rich data source for finding pictures for this project. There are also certain sections of the textbook that we have been including like news items. So I mentioned earlier that a huge benefit of OER is that they can be updated as new information arises. And in a healthcare setting, there's a lot of new treatments, a lot of new tests. But something that I did not anticipate was going to be updated was that mitochondrial DNA is not always only maternally inherited. There have been instances where paternal transmission of mitochondrial DNA has been discovered. Never thought I'd need to make that edit. So um, put that in a news article format for them. And I give them, the volunteers who work on this, a template where they can like fill it in and put the sources, and then it will be standardized in its appearance in the textbook. Here are some examples of SOPs. They also start with the table of contents and then kind of go into details of, this one's for our headings and like how those work. And there's some screen grabs in there. Here's another one about if you're adding new content, places to look for content that you can edit or remix, and then strategies for like writing your own content with links to additional SOPs. So how's it going? Well, the textbook is still being written at the time of this presentation, but it's going pretty well, and there have been a lot of successes along the way. So far, 16 undergrads have collaborated on this project, and we have a new cohort of undergrads who are going to be onboarded to it soon. There are 4 roles for students to work in: writer, editor, image finder slash alt image text writer, and image generator. So far, 7 chapters have been drafted to date, and they cover really fundamental topics, but also some content that's specific to nursing specialty areas. And we have 7 SOPs, but there's a couple more that we're gonna need to add. So this is really a timely addition to OER that fills a gap, and I think will be helpful to my students and get them the content that they need without causing them to spend a fortune. There are lots of helpers who have been willing and able to lend a hand. So it's a strong start, but we do need to reacclimate because we had a bunch of volunteers graduate last year. And so I got to onboard newbies and also get some additional SOPs and get some student leaders to oversee the workers a little bit more so that I have more time to kind of steer the ship. I also need to come up with a timeline to really budget the remaining time for the rest of the project. So from my standpoint, this has improved my course. Every time a chapter is finalized, I'm going to add it to the course. It's been a big knowledge and skill building opportunity for me. It also will build my resume. I'm going to list the textbook on my resume. I've been included in some open educational resource groups on campus that are like award based. So that all goes on my resume as well. I've been able to build close relationships with students. So that's all been very um, helpful for me. The volunteers are building and reinforcing knowledge, also building skills related to writing, editing, teamwork, leadership, um, figure generation, etc. Building their resume because they can, list this because it's open ed. They could even include a link to the stuff that they have created. It also allows them to build relationships with a faculty member, namely me, so that I can vouch for them on their med school and grad school applications and just support them in their career trajectory. And since a lot of the volunteers that I work with come from underrepresented backgrounds in science and medicine, it also elevates marginalized voices in science textbooks. For my future students, they'll be benefiting from the specialty knowledge, from the fact that this is freely available, and will remain current. So if they go and look back at it later, they can get updated information if something changes. Their accessibility needs will be addressed, and it will hopefully make the topic relevant to their careers. So I'm going to continue to build this content addressing the most pressing gaps, make my final edits to the figures and get it all formatted. I still do need to finalize the decisions regarding where I want to keep it. I think I'm just going to keep it in Google Docs and finalize the licensing decisions. And then I'm integrating it chapter by chapter into the upcoming semester. Some things that I learned, like identify key institutional supports, that's been huge for me. Finding people in my institution who support me through the library has been critical. Jump in, well begun is half done. Just getting it going, getting people working on it is huge. Um, Being deliberate and organized, using a system, having internal deadlines. I listed that one twice. Listening to the team to learn about their needs, let it evolve over time, and come up with instructions to meet the needs of your helpers, and you know, spread the word, get more people involved, help their CV and also yours. So that is my very quick overview of this project, which has truly been a labor of love, but I'm happy to address any questions y'all might have.
Nico, you have several questions in the chat.
Okay, cool. Let's see. Yes. So I'm at University of Texas at Austin in nursing, peer-led team learning, expand my knowledge. Trying to find the actual questions. Is the student work ongoing, or are there certain processes that have deadlines based on the undergrad's quarter semester long participation in a class? It's ongoing. These are all volunteers working outside of classes, so we try to just like line it up with their timeline and kind of the project timeline, but there have been times when we've had to pass it off to a new person. Is there any support for OER creation at your school? Yeah, the library has an open education fellows program, which provided me with some like buyout of my time and like a little bit of a like, award stipend. So that's been really huge. Um, the volunteers are devoting usually 5 hours of work per week to this project, but if they have other responsibilities in the lab, that 5 hours might be split. They have a 5 hour minimum required, but some volunteers work like 15 hours. I just kind of leave it up to them so long as they do the minimum and log their hours. Is there someone above you that you have to validate or approve incorporation of these chapters? There's no one above me, but I am utilizing some like calling in some favors with people who have specialty knowledge, like my mentors and like other friends from my grad school program who specialized in genetics. But like my boss or somebody like that isn't overseeing this. I think I got all of them. But y'all can also always email me. I'm, I think, the only Nico Osier out there, so should be easy to find. Thank y'all for coming.